Some days I crave adventure, but walking to see new places and things just aren't it. I'd rather float, but I would still like to get some sort of physical activity in. So I found a new personal hobby invented by Eskimos using what they like to call a man's boat, also known as the kayak. So today that's what I'll be informing you on. I'll go over the origins and the specifics of the kayak. I've completed a research on the history and different models for specific uses. I will go over the history of where they came from, basic anatomy of modern day kayaks, and different kayaks for specific environments. I will start with where they came from and what they were used for. According to the New World Encyclopedia, based off a book written by Yasunari Kawabata, kayaks were developed by native people in Arctic regions. They were used by indigenous people in Greenland, Alaska, northern Canada, and northeastern Asian countries. The first kayaks built were using driftwood and sealskin. They would use driftwood because there weren't any trees where they were making them, and they would use sealskin sewn together and wrapped around the frame. The same article, based off of Yasunari's book, states that archaeologists have discovered old designs of these watercraft, making us believe that kayaks are at least 4,000 years old. Back then, the first kayaks were used for skimming across cold waters quickly, as well as fishing and hunting for sea lion, whale, and seal. The indigenous people were able to do this because the kayak allowed them to move quickly and quietly across the water to sneak up on these animals. The idea of the Eskimo roll came about to hunt some of these animals. An Eskimo roll is where the kayaker will use their torso to flip the kayak upside down and go underwater to hunt. Now that we know where these kayaks came from, we now talk about the anatomy of modern day kayaks, and because they've developed a lot from using just driftwood and sealskin to now using plastics and fiberglass. There are now 7 main components of the kayak, which are the bow and the stern, the deck and hull, cockpit, seat, and footrests. The bow is the very front, and the stern is the very back. The bow is easy to tell apart from the stern because it comes to a narrow point. There are different uses for the bow depending on the type, but it always points in the direction that the kayaker is going. Different bows would be the snub nose for whitewater kayaks and longer, narrower points for touring kayaks. Sterns are a bit more rounded, and whitewater kayaks have even shorter sterns. Touring kayaks may have longer sterns for more stability. Next, we have the deck and the hull. The deck is the top of the kayak, and the hull is the very bottom of the kayak where it sits in the water. The deck will differ for sit-in kayaks and sit-on-top kayaks. For sit-in kayaks, they're good to prevent water from getting inside and staying dry. They're better for using in colder, rougher waters. Sit-on-top kayaks are good for being in the sun and having fun while getting wet and playing in the water. The hull is the part that sits in the water, and a rounded hull would be a displacement hull that pushes through the water, and a planing hull would be flat to skim over top of the water. Now we have the cockpit. This is where the kayaker will sit. Inside the cockpit, we have the seat and the footrests. The cockpit will change size according to the type of the kayak and its use. It also changes the ease of getting in and out and the amount of water that's able to enter. The cockpit will also help you determine whether there will be a cover or a skirt that's able to fit to keep the water out. It's important to have a comfortable seat for a long kayaking tour. That way the kayaker doesn't go numb. The footrests are a lot more important than someone would think because it helps the kayaker create more stability and control. Now that we've discussed key components of the kayak, we will now talk about different designs of each type of kayak for particular environments. There are different designs for different environments, and the two categories are flatwater and whitewater kayaks. Flatwater kayaks are typically for recreational use. These take place in calmer waters like lakes, ponds, canals, and calm riverways. The types of kayak used for flat water would be recreational and touring. Recreational kayaks are the most common kayaks that we use today. There are multiple choices within the selection, but they're usually shorter than 10 feet and have a shorter stern and a larger cockpit. Mike McIntyre with American Kayak Association says that touring kayaks are typically 12 feet or longer, and they glide through the water a lot faster since they are a lot more narrow. Touring kayaks also have smaller cockpits. Now we have whitewater kayaks, which are usually done in rougher waters like river rapids and oceans. Popular whitewater kayaks. A popular whitewater kayak is the playboat. They aren't very good for moving through the water because they are short and usually around 6 feet. The bow and stern are usually rounded and curves up, which would be called a continuous rocker. Sam O'Brien suggests that these boats are referred to as freestyle boats that allow you to surf wild waves and do gnarly tricks. Another whitewater kayak would be the creek boat, as we see here. These boats are built to take on water rapids and drop through waterfalls. These also have rounded hulls and enhanced rockers, which are extended bow and stern. These are great for maneuvering through hazards and obstacles, as well as fitting through tight areas. Finally, we have looked at the history of where kayaks came from, the basics of the bodies of these boats, and a few key differences for a variety of uses for a variety of environments. I hope that I've successfully informed you about the history of kayaking and key components of the adaptations that we have made for these boats as a historical sport. May you be able to strike up an informed conversation with your local yakker when you catch them out on the beaches. They might have some interesting stories to share with you from their ventures. Thank you for taking the time to listen today.